This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. This is part 2 of the FY21 budget presentation. As I've been doing with every recording, please email your comments and questions about the budget or the downtown to our city clerk so that it can be read out loud at the public meetings. We're going to be recording multiple presentations and posting them on YouTube for you all to watch. And we'll also be recording the actual meetings as well, so you can watch them either live or after they're recorded. And feel free to email us any comments and questions during the meeting or even after the meeting as well. For COVID-19 helpful numbers, for any emergencies, please call 911. For any COVID-19 non-emergency concerns, from a health perspective, please contact your primary care doctor or the Department of Health, either the Prince William Health District Call Center or the Virginia Department of Health. And then for food support to those who are staying home because they're part of the vulnerable populations, or from those who have been burdened and are now unemployed due to the COVID-19 recession, please call our COVID-19 hotline if you're in need of food support. As a reminder, part 1 of the presentation covered these topics: the governing body guidance, the recession impact from COVID-19, a summary of the FY21 budget and where we were headed in terms of the 10-year model with the downtown compared to not having the downtown, and then diving into a little bit of a budget overview from that executive summary that provides additional numbers and context for the downtown versus non-downtown. For today, I will cover the actual general fund budget, going into a little bit more detail on the budget, the debt, and the reserve positions. I will not be covering the CIP. That is a separate recording that was for the Planning Commission and governing body and for the public. It's an overview presentation of the CIP, and then each department is recording separate presentations where they go over project by project details as well. So I won't be covering that in this presentation as I normally do in the budget presentations. I'll then go over the enterprise funds, water and sewer, stormwater, and solid waste. I'll explain the spreadsheets that we're going to post on the city website so that you know how to read them and understand the different tabs if you want to look at the numbers, and then again just rehashing what the next steps are as well. We'll start with the general fund. We'll go over the FY21 overview, the 10-year fiscal stress model, the debt position, reserves, and then we won't cover the CIP. That's in a separate recording to be shared with everyone. So when you're looking at the FY21 compared to the FY20 budget, for this presentation, we'll be starting with the flat budget, no downtown, and then the following slides will be downtown 2% budget. So we'll keep alternating back and forth, and I'll do my best to explain which is flat with no downtown, and then which is a 2% growth budget for FY21 with a downtown long-term impact. This again is the flat FY21 budget, with the exception of those things that are mandated upon us, such as health insurance premiums and VRS retirement contributions and other specific line items. For example, the best example is going to be the training and uniforms required due to the high turnover that the city has in all of its departments. So you can see that the major impact from COVID-19 is going to be on the economic development revenues. We're assuming roughly almost a 30% collapse in FY20 in revenues, and then continuation 20% reduction in FY21. You can see, however, a lot of that was offset by an increase in assessment values for real estate properties, which helped cushion this fall. And we do have to utilize some slight reserves here for FY21, even in the flat budget model, roughly $100,000. For capital budget revenue, you see that the total revenue is going down. That has more to do with the decrease in transportation spending itself, and I cover that in my CIP presentation. Good news for this year, besides the real estate and personal property tax revenues increasing due to assessments and the annual decal. Besides that, we also had nearly a $700,000 saving in annual debt payments that I'll cover in the debt section, but that helps us tremendously in FY21. Other good news, besides shifting the 500 and we're cutting the $530,000 in library spending and shifting $250,000 of that in the Parks and Rec department. That's the majority of this decrease from the county contribution comes from that $530,000 savings. Beyond that, however, there was an across the board reduction due to true up savings. So we were essentially overcharged a couple of years ago, and the county does good accounting, and they determine when we owe more from the true up or when we owe less, and they reduce that in FY21. So this will bounce back up in FY21, assuming again that next year's true ups won't show additional overcharges in previous fiscal years. Like I just stated, the Parks and Rec budget is really not increasing by this much from FY20 to FY21. It's because we shifted the library expenditures from the county up into the Parks and Rec department, and also because of the potential impact from the minimum wage law that the state has adopted that will take effect on July 1st. This is the 2% model for FY21. There's an increase when you compare this to the previous slide in the community development department revenues, and this has to do with the site planning and permitting fees. If the downtown is approved, that will generate additional revenue. The question that will come out of that is, can the governing body allow the city to utilize portions of those revenues to hire a building official to cover these next few years with increased permit and site planning required for these large scale downtown developments? Besides just our one building inspector, we're going to need some additional support, but the good thing is the revenues will be developed or generated for that position over the next few years in this row here. We're using a lot more fund balance in the 2% model. Roughly over $400,000 in additional fund balance is needed for FY21 due to the 2% increases in pay that are part of this, along with some of the additional line item expenditures. You can see that the departmental budgets go up when compared to the previous slides, and that mainly has to do with the 2% pay raise. And then the transfer to schools also goes up with the 2% model. With this table, I should have started off with this, but the way to read this, of course, the top is the revenue categories and the total revenue. So you can see we have property taxes, economic development tax revenues, then the different departmental revenues from police, fire, emergency management, community development, social services, and parks and rec, and then some of the other miscellaneous revenue categories that aren't easily tied back to these departments. We also have your fund transfers, which not only includes fund balance, but actually the largest portion of this is the contribution, the reimbursements from the enterprise funds back to the general fund for the general fund support to the enterprise funds for things like payroll management, HR management, budget support, IT support, actual billing and collections of enterprise bills. Those things are actually not done by the water and sewer and stormwater divisions in the community development department. They're done by other general fund staff. So there's a large reimbursement to the general fund to cover that. That's the majority part of this, but also the utilization of fund balance is part of this as well. And you can see that increase in FY21. Moving down to expenditures, again, you have the FY20 comparison to FY21, where you see this A1, that means the amendment 1 that we did, that the governing body adopted back in December. So those are the two comparison points. And then you can see the different expenditure categories. You have the different departments. You have the governing body, clerk, and city attorney in one category, the constitutional officers and the registrar, and all the different components of the city administration, the city manager, HR, finance, and IT. police, fire, community development, social services, parks and rec, and then you have the different transfers to the debt fund for debt payments, the capital fund for the annual capital expenditures, and then contributions to reserves such as the rainy day fund. You have your transfers to the schools. As a reminder, the city transfers funding every year to schools, and the schools also receive revenue from the state and federal government and from local operations as well, much like some of our other departments do as well. And then our contributions to the county for things such as the court system, the jails, the CSB, which deals with mental health and then homelessness and the other components that are part of the county. And then the legal support dues and fees for our prosecuting attorney and other legal support that we have as a city, and then our capital budget contributions for those expenditures as well. That's how you read this table, and then you have highlights written here in the comments section so you can read what changed from FY20 to FY21. What are the key highlights? So this is something that the governing body likes to see on a yearly basis, just a good understanding of where our money comes from, and you'll see in the next slide where the money is going to based off the standard kind of $1 bill chart. So you can see that nearly 74% of all of our revenues in FY21 at least come from property taxes. You can see that 3.4 million come from commercial taxes. That's lower than normal because of the recession. So that kind of skews this number up and brings this number down from FY21. But you can see in general, we are dependent on property taxes. That's generally a bad thing when it comes to kind of tax burden, because most of our taxes, the burden actually falls on our residents instead of on the consumers and commercial tax revenues. So a lot of that commercial tax sales come from non-city residents as well when they come and dine in our restaurants or fill up at our gas stations and go in and buy products. You're essentially increasing taxes on non-residents and therefore decreasing the burden on residents here. We're very dependent on our residents for our taxes, so that's a bad thing that we want to change in the long run. However, what that does in FY21 for our city compared to other jurisdictions is it does cushion us a bit from the full impact of the COVID-19 recession. The risk is for next year, if there's going to be impacts on assessments, then we're going to take an even bigger hit in FY22. And that's why I'm recommending the governing body that we may have to stay conservative even until March of 2021 when we get the updated assessment data that will reflect the COVID-19 recession impacts. Then you can see some of the other categories of revenues from the departments and what percentage they provide. Again, in the long run, we need to increase this to decrease the burden on our residents. So where your tax dollars go, you can see the largest item that city taxes go to is our school system, and the second largest is our debt service. Unfortunately, we are spending more on debt than on all public safety combined. So this is police and fire and our dispatching as well. So we're spending almost $2 million more on debt this year than we are on public safety, and that's improved because of our debt going down, but we're still spending more on that. Then you can see the other categories of expenditures and what their share of every tax dollar is. So each line department generates revenues. So whatever we're expending for these departments, that doesn't mean, so for example, social services expenditures of $2.7 million in FY21, that doesn't mean that the tax impact on our taxpayers is $2.7 million, because we're receiving revenues from the state as well for social services. So the actual, what is called the department nets, this number here is the actual impact to our taxpayers for each department. Besides the social services receiving significant revenues from the state, the community development department, specifically for transportation, we receive annual revenues from VDOT to help with our transportation section for public works. For maintenance, we don't actually have a transportation planner or transportation manager. Our public works crew, it actually does the work and contracts out a lot of the work as well. And our community development director and our engineer, who's more specialized in the enterprise funds, they do their best in managing the transportation projects as well. But we do receive some state aid to support. It'd be nice if we had a little bit more as well, but the community development department also generates revenues from permitting fees as well. We do receive some grants for the fire department from the state, and then we have one line item from the state for police support as well, but it's really not that much when compared to the other departments. So it'd be nice if we could get some additional state funding for public safety as well. And then Parks and Rec, the revenues are going to be from sales, memberships, and daily usage revenue for our Parks and Rec programming and facilities. Forgot to mention for fire, the other major revenue category there is EMS billing. And then for police, some of the other major revenue categories are going to be for the court fines as well. So a total of $17.2 million in spending on the city departments actually has an impact on our taxpayers of $12.2 million because of these revenues. So the reason why we caveat everything is just because if you're going to reduce certain expenditures here, that doesn't mean that you get that 100% of that savings from your reductions, because you're going to be impacting the revenue streams associated with those expenditures as well. So it's not a dollar for dollar. So we develop a 10-year financial model to really determine if we're structurally sound. Do we have structural deficits, as we identified historically when we developed the FY18 budget amendment and the FY19 budget? When the first time we really looked at long-term forecasting, we determined that we actually had structural deficits, and we took actions to bring us to structural surpluses. That's the point of the long-term modeling. It helps us understand the impacts of decisions that we're making today and what that means for us in the future in terms of financial sustainability and financial strength. We're going to this. So the way to read this is very similar to the budget overview section. As you can see, the different revenue categories and expenditure categories are the same, but instead of comparing FY20 to FY21, we're looking at FY21 and beyond, and how revenues grow and how expenditures grow as well. We're looking at revenues. You can see that the COVID-19 recession will likely have a 3-year impact on our revenues. FY20, we're already seeing the impacts. FY21 from a commercial sales drop. So this used to be much higher, over $4 million. And then we hope that the commercial sales will return to normal by FY22, so return to kind of a steady state. But we're planning for a potential decrease in assessment values, especially commercial assessment values, and therefore we see a significant decrease in property tax revenues. And then we hope to return to normal, to a full return to a normal economy by FY23. Fund transfers will be utilizing significant fund balance, especially in FY22. This here for this 10-year model is the flat budget for FY21 and the no downtown model for the following years. That doesn't mean that that's what we have to stick with. We could do the flat budget model for FY21 and then the yes downtown for the following years, or we could do 2% in FY21 and then no downtown going forward. Those are all the different options we have, but here specifically for this table, it's the flat budget for FY21 and then the no downtown going forward, and you can see the $1 million usage of fund balance in FY22. This row is important for the long-term financial health of the city. So the plan is to start making some significant contributions to our reserve funds which I'll go over later in this presentation, starting in FY23. When you look at this table compared to, in a couple slides, I'll start reviewing the 10-year model with the downtown. You'll see that this number will go up a lot with the downtown, as will these numbers up here from property taxes and economic development tax revenues as well. This is a continuation of the no downtown model. You can see again, even if the downtown is not approved, I know this was a question from a resident, just to make sure that we're still building up our financial position regardless of the downtown, the answer is yes, and this is what it looks like. We're going to continue to work towards becoming a financially sustainable organization regardless of what happens with the downtown. And again, just a reminder, these are no downtown revenues. Over the last couple of years, I've been forecasting with an assumption of what would happen with the downtown. So this is the first time I'm showing a model that doesn't have the downtown, yet we're still providing contributions to reserves. What that means is that there's going to be impacts on other things that I'll go over later in this presentation. But as I shift to the next couple slides, you can start comparing these two rows where they'll end up by FY30. And also this contribution to reserves, how much more robust it is with the downtown model compared to the no downtown model. So this is the 2% budget model for FY21 with the downtown going forward. Again, we're still going to see those impacts regardless of even if the downtown is approved, the benefits start to accrue a little bit from a property tax standpoint in FY22. But not significant enough to really outweigh the potential impacts that we're going to see on assessments. Let's hope we're wrong. Let's see that we don't see impacts on assessment values and we can return to normal sooner rather than later, but that's not something that we're planning for in this budget model. So there's not a lot of change from the no downtown model to the downtown model in FY21-22. The real change is from the 2% decision in FY21 compared to the flat decision. But again, we have the options of mixing and matching what approaches we want to take. Same usage of fund transfers or utilization of fund balance slightly increased in FY21 with the 2% model of about $400,000, but then potential decrease in FY22 as you get some additional revenues as the downtown development begins and you see some of the residential units coming online. And don't forget, we also expect to see some of the benefits of phase 2. So even regardless of that phase 2 downtown development, we're still expecting a decrease in property taxes as a result of that decrease in assessment value. Again, we're going to be able to, if you compare this to the previous slides, we're able to contribute much more reserves as with the downtown model. There is increased usage in the 2% model in fund balance overall. So if we go with the best way to build up the city position would be flat budget in FY21 and then approving the downtown, the reserve positions would be much stronger that way. You can see how much larger the reserve contributions are. And when I get to that reserve section, I'll discuss what that means, what the implications are when we reach a very financially strong position towards this period, what our options are at that time. And that's all driven by increased revenues as a result of the downtown. As part of the downtown public hearing presentation, as part of my financial analysis, I only looked at real estate and personal property taxes. So I didn't make any assumptions on commercial taxes because I wanted that project itself to stand alone, even if there are no commercial revenues. I wanted to make sure that the project was profitable regardless of whether the commercial revenues existed or not. With this model, I am forecasting what the potential commercial revenues will be generated from that downtown development as a result of the different square footages and types of businesses that we're looking to get for not only the downtown, but also for our Route 28 property, which is also factored in the previous model, the no downtown model. We are looking at some benefits from that Route 28 property development, but here we're forecasting even expanded increase in the downtown. Regardless of where we're at, even getting to this number, we'll still be roughly at what, 40% of what Manassas is generating in current year. So they're going to have, of course, inflation and growth as well. So the goal is to try to get to the right proportion. We'll never generate from a dollar to dollar standpoint as much as some other jurisdictions, but at least we're going to be improving the proportion of commercial revenues that we're generating as a share of population and as a share of budget as well, to decrease the impact on our residents via tax cuts. So this is the no downtown model, the change in the budget over the next 10 years for both the downtown model and the no downtown model. You're going to see scaled back spending in FY21 compared to FY20 due to the recession. And then you can see a slight rebound in 22, that increase from, even with the no downtown model, from the phase 2 and a return to normal budgeting by FY23 at post recession from FY21 and 22, you will see a return to normalcy and then slight increases in the budget going forward. Remember, we are, even though the budget may be increasing by 0.89%, that 0.89% includes our reserve buildup that we start doing in FY23, and it includes the pay increases that we'll do even with the no downtown model. And when you go to the next slide, you'll see that will include the downtown. So just as a reminder, this is what the no downtown looks like. You go to the next slide, this is what the budget growth will look like with downtown. The majority of this spending increase is going to come from reserve buildup and additional pay increases that are enabled with the downtown that you can't do without the downtown. And for both of these models, we are assuming tax cuts. So we're reducing the actual tax, from a tax rate standpoint, the tax burden on our residents while still growing the budget. And with the no downtown model, that's enabled by the decrease in debt payments that we're going to make in FY23. And this much larger increase is enabled by the additional revenues generated from the downtown development. And then for a lot of these slides, just like I've done over the last few years, I did a best guess forecast the last few years of what the impacts would be. And I use this red shaded box areas to see what the difference would be between the downtown and no downtown strategies. This year, I have much better numbers as a result of the analysis that has been done with the developer based off of what's proposed to be developed. Now that we actually know what the downtown is going to look like, we can get much better estimates of what the implications are from both a revenue and an expenditure standpoint. So this here represents the increase compared with the downtown model compared to the no downtown model. So this is the tax cut plan with the no downtown model. Again, just like we remain committed to becoming a fiscally sustainable city, even without the downtown, we remain committed also to reducing the tax burden on our residents. The difference being that you get to start your tax cuts sooner with the downtown, and the rate would come down even more, and we have some additional options to cut it even further that I'll explain in the next slide. But you can see, even with the no downtown model, we're able to financially, assuming that we don't have major failures to our public works facilities or to City Hall that then causes a shift in CIP spending, that might cause a delay in tax cuts or pay raises or both. As a reminder, I haven't factored in those potential renovations that would have to be done to the public works building in City Hall if the no downtown model is done, because I'm trying to compare apples to apples, and we don't know exactly what the implications will be. But just keep that in the back of your mind that might push this back further, along with the pay increases as well, if we start seeing some major issues with those facilities that we can't delay further. But the plan is right now to start tax cuts. Why it's delayed to start with, besides just our financial position, we are supposed to have a 15% fund balance ratio as a share of our budget. Our fund balance position is not that. It's much lower. From a true standpoint, we're at around over 1% from how they calculate it. I'll go over that in the fund balance section. We're much closer, but we still don't get to that 15% in this model until FY 20. Well, I'll get to that later in the section, but I believe it is in FY 25 for the no downtown, which is why we start the tax cuts here, and then for the downtown model, we get there in 1 year sooner in FY 24 to get to the 15% ratio. As part of that covenant that we had for debt refunding in 2013, because the city was unable to pay its debt obligations, they received debt refunding at that time, and they agreed to keep 15% fund balance to budget ratio to ensure financial solvency. As part of that, there was a financial model which showed tax rates remaining at $1.65 and expenditures remaining at certain levels. The city did not stick with that model, and as a result, the fund balance position severely crashed, and the creditors were questioning that over the last few years. But with presentations of where we're headed as a city, we were able to reestablish our credit and ease the concerns of the creditors for not being in compliance right now with those agreements that we had in 2013. But we want to satisfy that to the best of our ability, and that's one of the major factors for why the tax cut plan is being delayed. Per the no downtown model, again, we start the 1 cent per year decrease in the tax rate starting in FY 25. By FY 30, that means that the tax rate will be at $1.49. Again, this is the no downtown model. You go with the downtown model, you can start it in FY 24, and the tax rate will go down to $1.48 by FY 30. However, as I get to the reserve section, you're going to see that there's a surplus in reserve as we get to FY 29 and FY 30, and that gives the city options for even deeper tax cuts at that time, or deeper, even more robust pay increases, or dealing with other capital liabilities, so saving up for future building renovations, or a combination of all three. The point is we have more options with the downtown, so we're doing better in terms of the tax rate, and we have more options to do even more at that time if that's what the governing body at that time decides to do. So the pay raise plan with the flat plus no downtown model, you can see that the average increases dropped from down to 2.2% from 2.9% in last year's model, with 0% in FY 21. It limits the potential for us to move to a grade step system for our public safety employees, as the other jurisdictions have, because of this the weak position. You can see I overlaid last year's model compared to what we're looking at now. Again, if we were to do a flat plus downtown model, it would still, at least this part would still look like this, but then it would scale up this way. Now, if the recession is not bad and we can get to this, then even in the, the 2% model, no downtown, it would look like this now. So these numbers would improve again. We have different options for mixing and matching, but you can see the decrease in the pay raise plan. There's decrease in a lot of things with the no downtown model. There's, delayed tax cuts. There's less of a pay raise for our staff. Capital is some of the projects get canceled with the no downtown model. And then the reserve positions, even though we continue to remain committed to building those reserve positions, they're much, much weaker with the no downtown model than they are with the downtown model. So again, this is the no downtown model, this blue curve. And when you look at the 2% plan with the downtown, it's a much more robust pay raise plan. So we maintain the model that we've committed to with the downtown model with 2% in FY21. Again, as I discussed with the tax cut plan, there's ability to even enhance it here due to the reserve surplus that we're going to have. We're in a structural surplus position starting really in FY29 that gives us some options to continue to go above and beyond even this if we decide to do that at that point. And we do have the strong potential to move to a grade step plan for our public safety employees at that time. Salary growth, what this looks like with the no downtown models, roughly $4,000 less in terms of salary by the end of the model than with the downtown or compared to last year's plan. And the salary will be roughly at $64,000 by FY30. The negative changes, even though they're the flat budget versus the 2% budget, contributes to that at least here in terms of FY21 growth. The negative changes have to do more with the actual downtown impact rather than what we're doing in FY21. So you can see with the downtown model, the salary growth is just like last year's model, and even further when you get out to FY30, the salary ends up growing to $68,000 compared to the no downtown model, where it's stuck at $64,000. So there's a $4,000 difference in pay with the downtown model versus the no downtown model, and that's even before you talk about the additional raises that are enabled with the surplus in reserve position that we get to in FY29, that we could then shift some of that to increase this even further to help us with our retention issues and to really reward our employees for having dealt with, a long period of just not seeing pay raises as our counterparts in other jurisdictions have been seeing. Reward them for all the great work they've been doing these last 10 to 15 years with minimal pay increases and an increased workload. So proportion of economic development revenues to residential revenues. This is comparing here the no downtown model with the downtown model. Even with the no downtown model, our growth rates for commercial revenue exceed the growth percentage assumptions for real estate and personal property tax. We're using those same assumptions in the downtown model, with the exception of we're adding additional volume, additional properties to those assessments. So that's the distinction. But even with the no downtown model, we expect to see this increase if the commercial revenue percentages outgrow the percentage growth rates for residential property taxes and personal property taxes, which we have seen the last few years. In FY19, we saw a 9% growth in our commercial revenue. So our economy has been getting stronger even without the downtown. So you do see an expected improvement of that share of economic development to residential revenues, which helps decrease the burden on our existing taxpayers. It's just much more robust when you introduce the downtown. And again, this represents all of that additional growth that we expect to see from the downtown and how much that decreases the burden on our residents. From a growth rate percentage, so for both FY21s, it's not shown on this table, but the bar goes down here. It's a negative, and same thing here. You're seeing a 20% decline in commercial revenues, and you're also seeing that in FY20. This huge jump here in FY22, it doesn't mean that our economy is going to be that much larger than what it was pre-COVID-19. These are just changes per year. So what this represents is just that huge decrease we're seeing in 20 and 21. This is a return to normalcy. You'll see a bounce back in the percentage change. But if you think about the total economy, if the economy was headed this way and then all of a sudden dropped here, it would just return back in FY22 to where it was before. And that's what we're showing here in both of these models. This is the no downtown model, and this is the downtown model. As you can see, the red shaded box signifies the additional growth that comes from the downtown compared to the no downtown. This yellow line, again, as a reminder, in FY19, we did see 9% growth. So besides, of course, this bounce back year, which is an anomaly, it's just reflecting the bounce back from this decrease. This is the true kind of growth that we're seeing with the downtown, and the numbers are not, they're still conservative numbers compared to the fact that we saw some strong growth even without the downtown. We're only forecasting 3 years where we're seeing additional growth beyond that, and then we're doing a much more conservative projection with overall growths, not including the downtown, which is reflected in this portion even of this table. So if someone argues that we should increase this assumption to higher here, well, you have to do the same thing here as well, because the bases are the same. This addition has to do with the additional commercial properties and their sale volume that's forecasted as a result of the downtown. Debt payments. If you had seen this chart before in previous years, you saw a skyrocketing, a huge increase of the annual debt payments up to FY19, which was the peak period. You can see from FY19 down to FY21, we've dropped by $1.3 million. That's the result of the refinancing efforts. In FY21, we're seeing a $700,000 saving drop from FY20. There was already planned slight drops from FY19, FY20, 21, and 22. They were just more gradual. And then in FY23 is when we always knew we were going to have the large drop. But by doing the refinancing, we've actually front-loaded a lot of the savings up to FY21 and 22 as well from the refinancing. And then again in FY23, we get an additional savings of $1.5 million to just ease the pain of the annual debt payments that we're making. Even this level, though, is still significantly higher than what it was just 4 or 5 years ago. So the burden remains on the city, but we're improving our revenues to be able to deal with this a little bit better in this period. And again, just as a reminder, this debt was generated in the 2000s from the financing construction of the 4 school facilities and the police station, fire station, and community center as well. That incurred significant amount of debt. There was also refunding due to the inability of the city to pay that debt during the Great Recession. That just pushed the spike, or the hump we call it, for the debt back to FY19. So we're dealing with that peak debt period even today. It's eased a lot from FY19 due to the refinancing that we did that took advantage of lower interest rates. What we want to get to is a more sustainable debt to budget ratio. Most of the other, or all the other jurisdictions across Northern Virginia are under 10% of their annual debt payments as a proportional share to their overall budget. We were at nearly 25% in FY19. You can see with debt refinancing, we've already improved that burden significantly. But by having this burden, everything that's above this recommended debt ceiling line, that's what's preventing us from doing the pay raises, from doing tax cuts, because it's such a large burden on our budget every year. You can see we get that additional 4 percentage point drop in FY23, which will be a significant help. In the long run, we want to stay within this recommended debt zone so that we continue to have financially sustainable positions and options to have a more healthy tax rate and a more healthy pay raise and a more healthy capital program and a more healthy contribution to our schools for funding as well. That's all enabled by, in the long run, making sure we do not exceed the debt ceiling that we're planning for now. You can see this is the no downtown model. When I click right, this is the downtown model. So you can see when you look at these years, we have much more relief, and that's not due to the debt position going down, but that's due to our revenues improving. So our overall budget strength grows at that time period. So there's less of the burden from debt on those years, even though we're still above the ceiling. So it's still a significant burden, but it's improved with the downtown models. You can see that the curve goes down for that one with the downtown. So looking at our reserve, this is the flat budget model and the no downtown model to start with. The way to read this table here, you have your different reserve categories, and there's definitions for what each of these reserve categories mean, what they do for the city. For example, the rainy day fund, that's supposed to be a fund that you have when you're facing a recession like we are now, to be able to deal with that recession, to be able to maintain your operations and even potentially support residents with tax cuts or businesses, as is being tried to be done right now with the COVID-19 recession. That's what your rainy day fund's supposed to be for. Think about it as recession insurance. So there's multiple categories of reserves. When you combine them all, the total number there represents the term that we utilize as fund balance. So the total balance that we have, again, if we were to pay everything that we owed and everything that was owed to us was received, what position or what balance we would have in our bank. That's what fund balance means. You can see where we're at in 19. Again, we expect to have a balanced budget in 20, which is part of that balanced budget was a contribution to reserves. If the recession is even worse than what we're projecting right now, the expectation would be that this 1.9 million would drop down to 1.715, because our goal is to maintain a balanced budget through spending reductions that we're holding back on expenditures here in FY20. So again, to read this is our position as of July 1st, 2019. This is our forecasted position when we start fiscal year 21, and this is the forecasted position for when we start fiscal year 31. These are the target ratios that define where we want to be, so what the formula is for figuring out what the target amount is. So the way to read this one is in FY21, if we were complying with these ratios, we would have nearly $25.5 million in fund balance, right, in FY21. This is what we expect to actually have. So you can see the difference. We're $23 million under where we should be if we wanted to be considered a financially strong jurisdiction. However, that target level grows as the budget grows, right? As your personnel budget grows with pay raises, additional personnel, your overall budget grows, so your rainy day fund obligations increase. So you're going to have a target amount by the end of the 10-year model. So you can see roughly a $3 million increase in the targeted amount. This is where we want to be in FY30 to call ourselves a financially strong community, right? This is where we end up with the no downtown model at $11.2 million, right? We really don't have these other funds. So the operating cash fund serves as the rainy day fund, serves as the capital fund. The problem with doing that is when you're dealing with recessions, if you start tapping into this fund, well, then now you're introducing a cash problem to your community, where you're gonna have to borrow cash because now you depleted your cash fund to serve as a rainy day fund. That's why you want to have these things separate. But you can see with the no downtown model, our position improves dramatically from where we are today, right? We're growing our position significantly by $10 million. So we're in a much better position than we are now with the no downtown model by contributing to reserves, but we're still far off where we want to be in terms of being a financially strong community. So again, we'll be a sustainable organization, but not a financially strong one. We'll be able to separate from the enterprise funds from a cash perspective. Right now, we're dependent on the water and sewer fund from a cash perspective during the year. However, even as we spend down the enterprise fund balances, this does not grow sufficiently enough to really get us to a strong financial cash position. We'll eventually get there, but it gets delayed with the no downtown model for when we get to a strong cash position. Then again, we're risking our cash position during and after recessions by relying on the operating cash fund to deal with all of these different components. And we're going to really struggle with doing major facility renovations without building up this asset management fund also. Now we go with the downtown model. To read this the same way as the previous slide, but you can see how much more our growth is. Remember the previous slide, this was around $11 million. You're going up to $33 million with the downtown, with the contributions to reserves. You can see now we're fully funded across all reserve categories. So even though we're at a deficit in FY21, we actually get into a surplus by FY30. That means that we have more money in reserves by FY30 than what we actually need. And that's why when you get to that FY29, FY30 timeframe, the city now has the luxury of having additional flexibility for either additional tax cuts, additional pay raises, or whatever it wants to do with this funding, because you're in a structurally sound position. You're generating structural surpluses, including when you're factoring in your maintenance of a reserve position. You're at a such strong position that you have enough money to continue to maintain your reserves, to fund all those things that you want to do, that you're now generating large surpluses that you can then utilize to ease taxes even further, pay raises, contributions to schools, capital, whatever it is that we want to do. By that period now, we're a financially strong city and we're able to do a lot more. And we're able to fully separate from a cash position from the enterprise funds without risking the cash position and allowing the enterprise funds to fully implement their planned capital improvement plans. And again, by having this fund, we're helping out future building renovations. By having this fund, we don't damage our cash position during recessions. We're able to deal with recession. Imagine if we had this money right now, how much easier what better position we'd be in right now to deal with these recession impacts from COVID-19. That's the hope, is to get to that so that the next recession in 10 years after this one, per the national business cycle that we've seen since World War II, we're going to be very well equipped to deal with that one. I'll now discuss our fund balance positions. These tables here, essentially this is what it looks like in the audited statements for the city. When you look up the actual financial audits of the city, you'll see tables that look like this. The top red table for the next few slides is going to be the no downtown model, and the bottom table, the green table, is going to be with the downtown model. So what this is saying here is the total fund balance position. There's different categories that the auditors look at. So for example, committed, this is where your rainy day fund would go, because it's committed to a specific purpose. And then unassigned is where your operating cash fund would go when you start looking at how we define reserve categories. But you can see the auditors have their definitions of the reserves, and then the different components of the reserves as well. So you have the general fund operating position. This includes the city departments and schools, the combined position, the capital projects funds, the debt service fund, what we've accumulated with proffers historically, and how that proffer fund is, and then non-major governmental categories. Examples of this would be the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority funds that they provide to us. You can see these are going to be committed funds. They're for specific transportation purposes. And then when you sum up all of these categories, you get to this column, the total governmental position. And when you sum all of these rows, you get to the total fund balance position of the city. Now, fortunately, the way that the 15% calculation is done, you can see what in FY19, what our position should have been to meet the 15% requirement. They utilize this number as the numerator, not this number. This is our true financial position. You can see we're really weaker than what this position is, because we have such a large negative balance from years and years of deficits. So you can see when you take what we should have for 15%, subtract it from what we actually have from a definitional standpoint, this is the variance that we have for that 15% threshold that we need to meet in order to be able to stay in compliance, be financially sustainable, and to begin tax cuts. However, to be fully financially sustainable, you want this number to match that number. And you'll see over the next few slides when we get to that position. So again, this top table over the next few slides is going to be the no downtown solution, and this is going to be the downtown solution. You can see in FY19 and 20, there's no differences between the two of them because we haven't implemented the flat budget in FY21 yet, or the 2%, and then we haven't decided on the downtown yet. So you're not seeing those effects in these two. So that's why they're identical. You start seeing the effects of the flat budget versus the 2% budget when you look at the FY21 position. So the flat budget keeps us closer to the 15% ratio, where the 2% makes our position a little bit worse. And then with FY22, the same thing with the recession, having made that decision for the 2% model in FY21, that carries over. So your position is still going to be worse in FY22, even with the downtown model, than it is with the no downtown model, and that has everything to do with the decision we're going to make in FY21, or whether we go with the flat budget or the 2% model. More to do with that than the actual downtown model. But you can see we still remain at negative positions. This number here is still lower than where we need to be to meet our 15% requirement. When you start getting into FY23, you can see it reverses. So with the downtown model now, you're generating such additional revenues despite the increased capital expenditures on the lease purchase for City Hall, right? You're still generating such surpluses that you're able to reduce the variance. So this number is a lot closer to this number in FY23 than with the no downtown model. You can see that the variance is still higher. And with the downtown model, you can see this color-coded purple here. What that means is that this number is actually higher than this number by this much. So we've actually met our 15% obligation by FY24, and that's when the tax cuts can start coming without violating the covenants of our debt agreements. That continues on. So you see with the no debt model, we're still remained committed to contributing to reserves. So we get to that point of this number exceeding this number in FY25 by $450,000. But you can see how much higher that is in FY25. We're about $3 million above the 15% requirement from a definitional standpoint. In FY25, we're only $450,000 in the no downtown model. You get to FY26, great news for the city, because now you can see this number that was a continual drag on our overall position. We wipe that out. So this number remains bigger than the 15% requirement. And from a true position now, this number even exceeds the 15% requirement. So truly the city has a 15%, above 15% requirement by about $1.5 million. You can see our position when you compare FY26 with the downtown model looks worse than the no downtown model. Well, that's because you got to factor in this. You got to add this number in addition to this, right? We eliminated that liability from the city, so that negative fund balance position, we eliminated that, and we're still above the 15% requirement. For the no downtown model, we get to that point where the actual true position of the city exceeds the 15% requirement by FY28. So you can start seeing the difference now when you get rid of the negative $4 million in FY28 what that brings this down to compared to where we're at in FY28 with the downtown model after we've already eliminated this number in previous years. So we're almost $9 million, $8 million higher in FY28 with the downtown model than we are with the no downtown model, and then that gets even even more pronounced with the when you start looking at the total positions. Remember, this variance number here is this number minus that number, but you also have to look at now this total number here, because whereas in the no downtown model, again, we're not building up a rainy day fund, we are with the downtown model. So remember, that's not part of this number here, but it is part of this number. So you can look at the total position of the city is going to be 35.5 million by FY30. It's only 13 million with the no downtown model. So you can see that difference of over $20 million improvement between the downtown position and the no downtown position, and that's why the reserve slide from a few slides ago looks so much more pronounced and better with the downtown model because of the additional revenues. And that's even subtracting the expenditures that we're going to have with the lease purchase agreement from the city hall, and also the financing of the acquisition of the community development building as well, and additional capital projects that are identified in my CIP presentation. From an FTE standpoint, these are additions that were made over the last year from the FY20 budget and the FY20 amended budget. The part-time dispatcher, the part-time registrar support in preparation for the presidential election and the early voting requirements. The assistant to the community development director, we finally got that position hired. The aquatics specialist, the porter, and the part-time janitor, and that again was funded by reducing contract expenditures for outsourced janitorial support. We're bringing that in-house and consolidating all the different departmental expenditure items into one to pay for these positions. The new position, the new FTE for FY20, even with the flat model, it does grow by one position, and that's the backflow prevention tech that I described at the last part one of this presentation, that our community development director will get into more details with his departmental presentation. So this is the flat budget model for FY21 from an FTE standpoint. This is the 2% model. So beyond just paying all these employees more with the 2%, we are making one additional request for making that part-time registrar position a full-time, because the actual early voting requirements have grown even more significantly from what we were planning last year. So there's a significant additional burden for the upcoming presidential election and even future elections because of early voting requirements that necessitate additional support for the registrar. So again, there's hybrid models that we could likely pursue. We can do flat budget plus this position. Nothing, there's nothing precluding us from having to just pick one flat or 2%. We can do a hybrid approach, and that's my actual recommendation, is that we look at kind of the flat budget as a starting point, but we do make some additions, including this part-time registrar to help out with the presidential elections, especially now with COVID-19. Who knows how long the social distancing will continue and how much potential increase in mailing ballots we'll have as well. So moving on to the water and sewer fund. Again, I'm not going to go over the CIP, but I will cover these other components. This looks just like the budget overview slide for the general fund, but this is for the water and sewer fund. You can see the different revenue categories and expenditure categories. Overall, our budget's growing by 6% due to scaled up spending on capital infrastructure, plus the backflow specialist. Again, to read this table, this is the FY21 compared to FY20 for expenditures and for revenues. And we have a description about what's actually changing in the budget here for you all to read. Sorry, this was the flat budget model. This is the 2% model. So you can see, please focus on this number, the 9.868. It actually goes up to 9.9, and that has to do with the 2% pay raise for our water and sewer employees as well. So the 10-year operating model, I'm just going to show the no downtown model, because the downtown model and the no downtown model are very similar for both models. They're very different from the capital, because you see additional tap fee revenues. And they're different from the 10-year operating model in terms of, in the downtown model, this number is less, so we're pulling less from reserves, and this number is greater. We're contributing more. So that's how we're maintaining a stronger reserve position, is in certain years we're contributing a little bit more to reserves and to capital, and other years we're taking less from reserves as a result of increased tap fee revenues on from a capital standpoint from the downtown, but also you're adding additional properties now who are paying the monthly water and sewer bill. So these numbers are going to go up as well with the downtown model. But for this here, this is the no downtown model, just to give you a feel for how the budgets are changing. And you can see that the largest revenue sources from the monthly user fees, and that will grow even with the no downtown model because of the addition of the phase 2 development as well. And because we're going to start rate increases in FY23 if we commit to the current CIP plan for infrastructure enhancements and maintenance. And then this is just how much we're pulling from reserves to finance, especially the capital expenditures year to year. Just like in the CIP, when you watch that presentation, you'll see that the majority of the actual expenditures come from both our sewer debt and our water debt, from water capacity and from the UOSA sewer capacity as well. You can see that most of your bill is actually fixed, so it comes from both that debt plus these expenditures. This is the water so majority of this number here is the debt that we have to pay in to have our UOSA sewer and our water capacity from an infrastructure standpoint. And then this is what we're paying on an annual operating basis. This is the cost of actually buying the water that we distribute for both the City of Manassas and Prince William Water Authority. And then this is what we're sending to UOSA every year as well for their annual operating expenditures. So the majority of the bill that you're paying, it comes from fixed expenditures to the city. The only areas where we have flexibility are going to be here, personnel, but you need your personnel to operate your system. Your overhead supplies, your contracted support, those are the areas that we try to keep tight, but we're spending very little on a lot of these things in comparison to the overall budget. So the majority of the actual expenditures are fixed from external sources. You can see throughout the 10-year model the changes in the user fee revenues from both increasing from phase 2 the base and then increasing the rates as well. You can see we stop the rate increases eventually. And we feel we've implemented the aggressive capital improvement plan without depleting our reserves. And you can see the contribution from reserves go down as a result. And you can see how these fixed expenditures continue to rise as well. Rate increase, again, we've been holding the rate flat for many years. They were increased before in order to build up a healthy fund balance position to pursue the necessary capital infrastructure improvements, especially on the infrastructure on the western half of the city that's older infrastructure and continues to fail. That was a purpose of previous rate increases in the 2000s. We built up that fund balance. Unfortunately, they were not able to spend it because it was required from a cash perspective for the city because of how weak the general fund balance was. Well, now that you're going to start ramping up water and sewer capital infrastructure spending, the fund balance alone is not enough. So you're going to have to do rate increases, which have been deferred, which if you've been keeping up with inflation, we probably would have been up here before, not from a rate increase standpoint, but from a revenue standpoint. And so your rate increases then would have been a little bit more balanced. but because it's been a 0% increase for so many years, you're playing catch up now. When you start implementing your aggressive CIP, once you're done with that aggressive CIP, you scale back those increases to the point where you get to 0%. There's no change in the average increase from last year's model. Again, we really need to do a rate study and asset management plan to make sure we're doing this right. For the annual water and sewer debt payments, we also have a little bit of relief in FY23 from the water portion of our debt, drops by about $300,000, which helps the city from a cash perspective. And then sewer in FY29. I don't actually expect this to happen, however. I remember the base here is $2 million. This doesn't mean we're getting close to zero. We're still paying UOSA debt, but it drops by around $800,000 at that point. The thing is, though, there's likely going to be new debt coming from UOSA as all the jurisdictions reach their capacity levels for what UOSA can treat. With population growth, there's going to have to be additional capacity. So I can see this at the very least kind of maintaining kind of a steady course versus dropping this much here in this time period. For water and sewer reserves, I will do a comparison of the no downtown versus the downtown. This is the same spreadsheet that we utilize for the general fund, but you can see there's no rainy day fund because you don't tend to see an impact in the revenues from this source from recessions that you do with the general fund. So you're really just talking about maintaining a strong cash position and a capital position and dealing with your employees as well and their requirements. So you can see where we are now as we continue to ramp up our capital expenditures. You can see where we're expected to be at the end of FY20. This may be improved as we delay certain expenditures due to our cash position. But you can see certainly as we aggressively tackle our capital requirements, that overall position will drop to about $3.3 million with the no downtown model because you're not generating the tap fee revenues to help out with that effort. So you end up in right now we're at a positive in 2021. We have $4.4 million more in reserves than what we actually need to maintain operations for the water and sewer enterprise fund. By FY30, we're actually at a negative nearly $3 million position. So again, that's because we're ramping up the CIP. This year's CIP, you'll see for water and sewer is much more aggressive than last year. We may need to scale that back to avoid getting to this point if there's no downtown development agreement. Unless, again, if we're comfortable with the general fund balance position, subsidizing the water and sewer fund in the future from a reserve cash position standpoint, but I don't recommend that we do that. I believe each fund should be self-sustaining and not borrowing cash from each other. With the downtown, however, we maintain where we need to be. We're not at a robust positive position, but we're at least maintaining where we need to be while able to tackle all of the major capital requirements that the community development department is looking to pursue to have a healthy water and sewer infrastructure position. And the reason why we're able to get this is not only are the annual user fee revenues going up from the additional people paying in, but you're also generating a significant amount of tap fee revenues as well to help out with your overall fund balance position. And what that enables us to do once we've tackled our key capital items, and if we're in a healthy structural annual surplus, then we can start talking about at least keeping rates flat for a few years like we've been doing the last few years, or potentially even decreasing that, all the while accomplishing our capital infrastructure goals. These all become options again by FY30 with the downtown development. For the stormwater fund, here we have the comparison of the flat budget model and the 2% model here. You can see the slight increase. You look at this revenue here for personnel, compare that to personnel here. that's because of the 2% pay raise. Overall, in both models, you can see that there's a decrease in spending in FY21. That has to do more with the decrease in contribution to the stormwater capital side due to the Connor Center Pond, which again may trickle over from FY20 into FY21. So this number may come down and this one may go up with the budget amendment. The 10-year model, you can see what we're contributing to capital and how that begins to go up by the amount of debt we have to start paying in FY24 when we start the stream restoration project sometime in FY23. Please watch my CIP presentation where I go into a little bit more details on why that's happening and what the requirements are from a stormwater standpoint. With all of the mandates for what we have to do to reduce pollutants to our stormwater, we've been pursuing aggressive rate growths, unfortunately, in order to cover the increased liability and capital expenditures. We're really saving up for this project, the Russia Branch Stream Restoration Project, which is a multi-million-dollar project for which we're going to have to borrow, hopefully, revenue bonds for coming out of the stormwater fund to deal with. The hope is that we can not do this if we can get additional 50% grant funding from the state or federal government, then hopefully this can come down significantly so that we're not putting the burden on our residents to fulfill mandates that are coming from the federal government and state government. From a stormwater reserve position, we don't have the same plans that we do for the general fund and the water and sewer fund. The fund balance there just exists to stay positive and not be a negative drag on the other funds, but that's it. We want to save up some money to help us with our capital projects, but once we implement those capital projects and we're done with those capital projects, all we want to do is stay slightly positive so that it's not a negative burden on the other enterprise funds. And you can see that with this model here. The solid waste fund, as a reminder, the trash payments that residents are making on a monthly basis are part of your water and sewer bill. So when you look at that bill, it's not just water and sewer, and actually the water and sewer rates have not gone up the last few years. What has gone up is the solid waste rates. So again, you can see here I'm showing the both the 10-year model and the annual model. This is the 2% pay raise model. There's no real difference with the downtown versus non-downtown model, except that as you do more robust pay raises, there's a portion of this expenditure that's going to go up to cover those pay raises for the percentage of time that our employees are managing the solid waste program. Even though we contract out the services, there's still components to that have to be managed by city employees themselves. But the majority of these expenditures actually come from the contract services themselves. Again, these are static kind of model numbers that we're sticking with. We're not yet forecasting or making assumptions about the waste transfer station and recycling station, but we do believe that's going to help ease the burden on this fund, both from an expenditure standpoint and by the new revenues now generated from those facilities that will come to the city. Again, the majority of those revenues, my recommendation will be to use them for the unfunded transportation liabilities that we have for annual road maintenance, since the impact of the transfer stations will be on our roads more than anything else. But we can certainly use a percentage of that revenue to help ease the pay on our residents in terms of the actual solid waste bill that's sent out on a monthly basis. Here's the fee rate percentage growth. No change again from last year's model, but it's a little bit more flat compared to last year. Again, the large increases over the last few years has really been from the expenditures related to recycling going up dramatically, and that has to do more with kind of global factors than what we can control, specifically related to the Chinese purchase of recycled goods being scaled back dramatically. They were the major demand for all of the recycling supply, the global recycling supply. that got scaled back, resulting in the oversupply and lack of demand for recycling. So there was now charges to actually process recycling, whereas before you can make money on recycling. That's no longer the case, and that's what resulted in skyrocketing costs for recycling across the country, and we felt that impact as well, which is why we had to do rate increases. The hope is with the waste transfer station and the recycling station, we're going to be able to slow down the growth in those global pressure created costs. Here's the trash fee, that what you're paying on a monthly basis and where right now, or what's proposed in FY21 and where that's headed. As a reference point, the city of Manassas, for at least their townhomes right now in FY21 are charging $27.88, so pretty close to where we're going to be in FY25. So we're still much more competitive even in the city of Manassas, and the hope is to bring this down, or at least to keep the scale back the growth of this as we see the positive impacts from the waste transfer station and the recycling station as well. So now I'm going to close this 1 second and go over the actual Excel files. So there's going to be 2 Excel files. There'll be the flat Excel file that will be posted on the website. What the flat spreadsheet will be is the FY21 flat budget plus the no downtown model. So when you open up these spreadsheets, you'll be able to see that there's multiple tabs here. The tab that we're in right now is called the budget overview tab, and it just is a quick summary. If you don't want to spend a lot of time with all these other tabs, it tells you what's happening with the overall, the general fund budget by revenue category, expenditure category, same thing for the water and sewer fund, same thing for the stormwater, solid waste, or schools, and then the total city budget. This is every single revenue that we receive and every single expenditure that we have as a city. That's what this tab shows. The numbers from this come from this critical tab here called the line item budget. So if you want to see what's been happening on a line item basis, we always start with revenues up top. We show the last few years actuals, what's been happening, what the current budget year is, and then everything, what's proposed for FY21, and then what's part of the 10-year model that's being planned. So you can see all of the revenue line items. These categories match the categories in the budget overview tab. So you go here and you can see the different categories for revenues and what are all the different components that comprise those revenues. And you keep scrolling down, you can get the revenue totals, and then you can go down and start looking at the expenditures by category. The commissioner revenue, the treasurer, if you want to see what their budget looks like on a line item basis, that's how you would do that. You scroll down to the end of the general fund budget and you get the total expenditures. And then you get the net position. So are we at a surplus or at a deficit? And to go up as well, you can see what we're going to be doing from a reserve standpoint as well. And then this line item budget is the same for all the different funds. You have a 10-year summary by general fund, by water and sewer, by all the funds, which lays out the budget overview tab, but across the 10 years. Then you have the detailed line item CIP. Again, general fund revenues, followed by general fund expenditures, followed by water and sewer and stormwater. You have the capital budget, which pulls from the CIP, but just really does a comparison of FY20 to FY21. You have the CIP summary, 10-year model as well, for where everything is headed from a program standpoint. You have our actual debt schedule. So what the city is paying for debt, what the principal, what the interest, what the total is, starting from FY15, going through the end of our debt period in FY36, so the last year of our current debt that we have right now. And that's for the general fund for the city and schools, for the water and sewer fund, for specifically for the water debt up here. Then you can see the UOSA debt payments here. And if you go all the way to the left, you can see kind of the outstanding debt position for the city. You can see where we were in 2016 of about 160 million total outstanding debt, and how that number drops over the next 15 years to when we finally get it to zero in 2036. That's how to read our debt position. And you have the reserve tab, which just goes over the spreadsheet from the PowerPoint presentation. You have all of the fund balance data for the city from FY17 all the way down to FY30. And then when you scroll right, you have the net unassigned positions for all of your funds, so you can track what that is. You've added this fund balance by department. There's certain funds that we have, for example, police, the state forfeiture and asset seizure fund balance that they have for different things that legally the state, for any revenues that we generate, they dictate that what you can actually spend this money on. So we track this separately to make sure that we don't spend these dollars on other components. You can see social services has a special welfare fund. Parks and Rec has some funds as well. And this is how we figure out the reimbursement from the enterprise funds back to the general fund for based off of the workload from the different departments, what they're doing to support the water and sewer fund. So you can see, for example, the treasurer, the majority of the work that they do is really oriented towards water and sewer billing. So that's the majority of time that they spend, so they get reimbursed for that. For the time that I spend on the management, the budgeting, and all those components as well. HR, from a personnel standpoint, finance from a payroll, budgeting standpoint as well, IT, all the different components of the time that we're spending. And this analysis was done a few years ago. We're continuing to kind of carry that analysis. We can certainly, once we get better financial software for the community development department, the hope is to be able to better, and once we get to online timesheets, which we're currently doing paper right now, but we hope to improve our software to the point where we're doing online timesheets and we can better code actuals for what we're doing, and then we can develop a much better model that's regularly updated to determine what we're actually need to reimburse from those funds. We have the department nets that I showed you earlier. This wasn't part of the presentation, but we lay out kind of what the forecast is for unfunded positions that we would like to see created, and the timelines and costs, and what the benefits are of adding those positions. We do the same thing with capital expenditures as well. And then if you want to see the actual budget charts that I have in my presentation, you can take a look at these, and then the updated assessment data as well from our assessors. So that's how you read the spreadsheet itself. Again, we're going to have two. This is the flat budget for FY21 with no downtown, and then this is what the 2% budget will look like then with the downtown. You can see the stronger reserve position. So if you want to see how that goes, you read these spreadsheets. They're identical with those changes in terms of the 2% and the downtown. So both of these will be shared on our city website for the public and the governing body and planning commission to review. Okay. So back to the spreadsheet for next steps. As I went over last week, we're working right now on the virtual presentations of the CIP. I did my overview today, so I'll be posting that shortly. And then next week, the departments will do a project by project recording. They'll also do their presentations for their overall budget. And then we want to solicit public input over the next few weeks as well on everything that we presented. We're looking to do budget work sessions on April 14th and May 5th. So please tune in. And then public hearing date for the actual budget and for the tax rate is going to be on May 19th, with expected vote sometime in June. Again, we're going to have to relook at our budget here. We always do the mid-year budget review anyways to evaluate how we ended the previous year and to make any adjustments to our budget. But we're really going to have to look at this twice, kind of start evaluating the full impact of COVID-19 from a commercial sales standpoint here, and then what the impact's going to be on actual real estate assessment, especially commercial real estate as well, to see what position we're truly in based off of those impacts before we make any major decisions on our budget in terms of expenditure increases. And then here are the key decision points for the governing body to evaluate and discuss over the next couple of months. Again, as I start off the presentation, please email us your comments to the email address here. And we're going to do our best to continue recording these presentations and streaming our actual meetings. And then here are the helpful phone numbers again and email addresses for the COVID-19 helpful numbers from the health department standpoint, and then for our food hotline as well. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to all of these presentations. I hope they were useful. Have a good weekend.